What's up everyone? John Rettinger from Techno Buffalo here with a full review for you of the Android tablet that's kicking off the honeycomb craze. This is of course the Motorola Xoom, the first tablet to run Android's 3.0 operating system. Let's go ahead and dig in and see if it lives up to the hype. Being a slate device, how you interact with the tablet and how you get your information is going to be of paramount importance. So that's where we're going to begin with the navigation and UI. There are a lot of differences here with previous versions of Android. The first and most notable is the presence of a soft home button. We don't have any physical buttons here on the outside of the screen. So you don't have your capacitive home menu back and search button or sometimes physical buttons in the case of some devices. It's completely soft here. And it's always going to be present in the bottom left-hand corner, no matter what orientation you have your device. It's always going to be there no matter what application you are in. So there's a bit of a learning curve, and it took a little while to get used to, about 2 days of using the Xoom as my dedicated tablet. But I became used to it very quickly. In fact, I tended to prefer it. I always knew where it was going to be located if I had the device turned to the left. I knew it was always going to be there in the bottom left-hand corner. If it was oriented to the right, it wouldn't matter. It was always there. Something that I really tended to enjoy, and one of the things that I thought was going to annoy me about the Xoom really tended to go against what I initially expected. Next, you've got a very nice and intuitive notification system down here below, similar to what you might see if you've ever used Growl notifications. They pop up in a very unobtrusive manner, and they don't stop what you're doing. You can see right there I've got an email, calendar, and you can have a ton of other choices. You can pull up settings very quickly by tapping the clock, and it'll show you all your notifications. You can tap the home screen to get rid of them. You've got what I'm sort of referring to as smart widgets. You can interact with these widgets in a lot of new manners that you couldn't necessarily easily do with older versions of Android. So for example, I've got a CNN application right here. I can go ahead and scroll through different articles, find what I want, click it, and it will launch the browser. Emails here, you can see the same thing, calendar, and some web choices. Now how you're going to access these widgets might be very familiar if you used Android. Go ahead and tap anywhere of the 5 home screens here, and you've now got 4 choices for choosing. 4 choices for choosing, of course. You've got widgets, app shortcuts, wallpapers, and more. And in the more category, you're going to see a ton of different choices here. Bookmark, contacts, email account, Gmail label, and a few other options. If you want to go back, you've got another soft button down there, which is going to be a left arrow. Let's go ahead and select home. The next thing that I want to mention is a button that lives right to the right of that home button. Looks like 2 rectangles. That is your multitasking, which is done in a very new and I think pretty intuitive way here with Android 3.0. If you go ahead and select it, it's going to pull up what you're most recently doing. So if I wanted to jump into my browser, I can go ahead and do that very easily. If I wanted to go back into settings where I was earlier, go ahead and do that nice and easily. The multitasking here really is done very eloquently, if you can say that. In a very easy to understand fashion. Overall, using the UI and the navigation, there definitely was a learning curve. If you've ever used an Android device, you're going to have to remember how to do different things. You're going to have to try and forget what you used to do on previous versions of Android. Overall, it took me about 3 to 4 days to really get a hang of the nuances of the device and learn how to use it. Alright, so next let's talk about performance. This thing is really packing a powerhouse of a processor. With the NVIDIA Tegra 2 dual-core chip. This thing should be very, very fast. And I found it wasn't as blistering fast as I expected it to be. Launching applications, for example, could be very slow. And that may be due to a very severe lack of dedicated tablet applications in the Android market, which we'll talk about in just a minute. I experienced several crashes while browsing the web, and I think it comes from a lack of optimization for the dual-core hardware. Now, while Android 3.0 Honeycomb is supposed to be optimized, it is the first version of the operating system. I do suspect that future Android updates will alleviate a lot of these concerns, but if you're looking for a blistering fast tablet performance, you're not going to get that on the Xoom. It is certainly fast for everyday usage, and it is relatively zippy while doing tasks, everyday tasks such as multitasking. But if you're expecting huge speeds improvements over what you've seen on your Snapdragon Android phone or on an iPad by comparison, you're not going to be overly impressed with the performance. Again, I do think that's going to improve with subsequent software updates. Next, let's talk about the screen. It's got a 10.1-inch diagonal capacitive display, and the resolution of 1280 by 800 should be vivid. but images do tend to look a little bit washed out. So I'm going to go ahead and use the multitasking here, and we'll jump into gallery and look at an image that I took, for example, using the rear-facing 5-megapixel camera. It's just not overly sharp and crisp and clear. The screen does tend to look a little bit washed out. And referencing back to my performance, you can see what I'm referring to when I say it's not blistering fast. The pinch to zoom here, there's a little bit of a delay. I've used Android devices, previous versions of Android devices with much slower processors that have actually been a bit more responsive. But going back to the images here and the screen, it doesn't pop as you would expect a screen of this high resolution. They're certainly visible and they're easy to look at, but it's not as bright and vibrant as I would have expected. Alright, so next let's jump in and talk about the browser. I will say this is probably one of the best uses of tabbed browsing. Certainly there are third-party tab browsers on a competitor like the iPad, but the native Safari browser just doesn't support it. And it doesn't work as well. I loved the layout here of the browser. You could load tabs in the background. The pinch to zoom can be a little bit laggy. Let me go ahead and jump into Techno Buffalo here, and you can see what the keyboard looks like. The keyboard here is extremely easy to use, very easy to type on, and the autocorrect, as sort of typical Android, is excellent. So I'll go ahead and load it up here, and we'll take a look at the browsing. And this will sort of reference back to the performance. It's a little bit slow. It's not as fluid as I would expect from a modern tablet. It's very usable though, and I think that I was getting a bit excited with the properties of what Tegra 2 could do, and perhaps there's a little bit of managing expectations. Now certainly it's not going to be a hard internet experience. You're not going to be waiting for pages to load assuming you're on a decent internet connection, but you're just not going to get blistering fast performance. So go ahead and see what the scrolling looks like there. Go ahead and stop, and of course you can do your multi-touch pinch to zoom. I will say though that I love the browser on this. I think the tab browsing is absolutely outstanding. Flash is not yet on it, so that might be a problem for some, but Adobe has said it'll be coming very soon. That's more of an Adobe issue than a Motorola or Google thing. Alright, so let's go ahead and jump home, and let's talk about apps, since apps are generally what a lot of us use on our mobile devices. Now, unfortunately, there are not that many dedicated applications here for the tablets. I'm going to go ahead and show you what the redesigned Android market looks like. They did a fantastic job with the UI of this. It really looks very nice. If I jump into featured tablet apps, for example, there just aren't that many right now. Now, day by day, more and more show up as developers get access to the APIs and they have time to develop. So certainly this is a problem that will rectify itself very soon. But there aren't that many applications right now that are meant for Android 3.0 Honeycomb. So what that means is you're going to have to use the legacy applications that were meant for, you know, the 2. Whatever operating systems. Things like Twitter, for example. You're going to have to use an older application. And I found that I had a problem using older applications with crashing. Oftentimes they weren't fully supported if I wanted to use something on a regular basis. Like I use Bloomberg, for example. That would constantly crash. While using an older application that's meant to run on Android 2.0, as I mentioned earlier, you're going to have another icon on the bottom there. You can see it right behind inside the multitasking, which is going to be your menu, which you would get if you were using an older Android device. So something to keep in mind, if applications are really important to you right now, you may want to wait to pick up Motorola Xoom. However, I assume in the coming weeks and months, as more people get to develop for the platform, that will be rectified and fixed. Next, let's talk about build quality. You're going to hold this guy in your hands quite a bit, and I will say build quality feels outstanding. Definitely feels professional grade. The metal on the back, the feeling of holding it on the side, it just feels very good. Build quality really is outstanding. And speaking of outstanding, battery life is actually very impressive here as well. If you use this on a very regular basis for emails, as I do, with the cellular data turned off on Wi-Fi, you're going to have no problem getting through 2 or 3 days. Granted, by day 3, you might be close to being powered out, but you won't have much of a trouble. Battery life is really, really nice. One of the things that I don't like about it is it doesn't charge, unfortunately, via micro USB. Instead, it uses a proprietary port. So I didn't like that I have to carry around a separate power charger if I was traveling with the Xoom. Cameras are pretty standard. You've got a 5-megapixel shooter located on the back, dual LED flash, and actually have a pretty high resolution for front-facing camera here at 2 megapixel. The interface for using the camera is actually very nice and really intuitive here on Android 3.0, sort of done in that half circle fashion. You can take some pictures and you can go ahead and move around and have a ton of different options, ranging from camera settings to scene modes, and there are quite a few: color effects, white balance, and then of course flash, and you manage your zoom right from there. Camera quality was about average, what you'd expect from a 5 megapixel, essentially a camera phone. Certainly it's not going to replace your daily point-and-shoot camera, but for getting pictures of your dog, your cat, or whatever you might want to do, this is really going to probably work out very nicely for you. So the conclusion: I think the Xoom has tremendous potential. And when I say the Xoom, I really mean Android 3.0 as a whole. I think it needs 1 or 2 software augmentations here to fix some of the lagging issues and take advantage of the raw horsepower that the tablet has. I think that once we get the 4G LTE upgrade as well, it's going to be screaming fast for the mobile users. I love that it has DLNA support, and I really would like there to be more application support from day one. And that fault lies with Google for not releasing the SDK until relatively close to Android 3.0's launch. I'd say if I have to grade this on a 1 to 5 star scale, it gets a very solid 3.5, but has potential for much more. Once we get more applications, once we have to rely less on older apps that were meant for Android 2.0, once we've got a software upgrade or two that takes more advantage of the multiple cores found in the Tegra 2, which most of these tablets are going to be running, I think we're looking at an outstanding competitor for the iPad, for HP's touchpad, and whatever else may be coming on the market. Looking at you, Ring Playbook. So if you are an Android fan, or you just want to give Android tablets a try, I do not think you're going to be disappointed with the Motorola Xoom, and your experience is only going to get better as more developers get their hands on it. So I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. Are you Xoom fans? Are you not Xoom fans? Do you agree or disagree? Sound off down below. I'm John Rettinger from Techno Buffalo, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.